take nothing from Big L but his lost chief. The last punk who fronted got him out full of force.
Finesse, Jay-Z, a lot of cats was on that first album, you know what I mean?
And clown rappers I'm bound to slay. I'm saying hi to all the cuties from around the way.
Big L is an undeniable testament to both immense talent and the painful tragedy behind the glitz and glamour of a rising star. A genius who rhymes as sharply as a razor with an engaging flow that quickly made him one of the most promising faces of the 1990s. However, Big L's life also didn't escape the curse of short life, where talents that had just begun to bloom were extinguished by fate. A series of gunshots in the heart of Harlem left a cold void in the global rap community. But what's even more chilling is that Big L's death wasn't lonely. At the same time, American hip-hop witnessed a series of consecutive deaths of black rappers, unexpected shootings, and deaths with the same motif repeating like an ominous sign. A double mourning enveloped the entire community. Is it all just random? Or is there some invisible hand pulling each star down just as they are about to reach their peak? And today, we will reopen that entire file, every relationship, every anomaly to find the answer. Why was Big L killed, and by whom? Why was American hip-hop that year mired in such a terrifying series of tragedies? Let's get started. 1. Genius out of time. Big L grew up in Harlem in a context that was almost destined for tragedy. Harlem in the 70s and 80s was not a place for childhood. It's like a giant cage locked with dilapidated resettlement buildings, iron gates dented from break-ins, and the sound of unexpected gunfire. 139th Street, where Big L was born, is a slice of America that history has neglected. Their children don't sleep because of their biological clocks, but because of the chaotic sound of slippers running after every bang. They don't learn to read first, but learn which dangerous faces to avoid. L grew up in that atmosphere, with 2 older brothers and a gaunt single mother named Pinky, a woman with a heart warm enough for the whole block, but who had nothing to keep her own children warm. Dad left when L was so young he couldn't even remember what he looked like. His mother takes care of the entire neighborhood, cooking, organizing block parties, and helping each house when they have problems. She was the person Harlem relied on, while her own home was sinking. That kindness caused L to grow up in a very Harlem paradox. His mother could solve everyone else's problems, but was powerless against her own child's life. It's not her fault, it's the fault of a system that built Harlem like a trap. L once said that in his youth, he sometimes wondered if he was just a spare child in his mother's kindness. But that pain made L resilient in a way that only Harlem could. There were times when his mother was so exhausted that the family had to send L to live with his uncle. Adults saw it as a temporary solution, but for a child who clung to the little they had, to feel like they still belonged to their family, having to change their last name to Coleman, was like being uprooted from their very roots. But L didn't cry, didn't ask why. You're like something that needs to be unloaded. That moment of being transferred left a huge void in L, a void that no family could fill. But amidst the darkness, Harlem still placed 2 guiding lights in L's life. The eldest brother is a rare bright spot in the poor block, a soft but emotionally rich Harlem artist type. He's passionate about music rhythm and the old turntable he bought with his savings. It was Don who made L feel that music wasn't a distant dream, but a real path that could be taken. And Lee, the second brother, is the complete opposite, a true tough guy. So dangerous that even the thugs know to avoid him at the mention of his name. If Don opened the door for L to enter the world of music, then Lee taught him the unwritten street code not found in books. 2 brothers in opposite directions, yet both carved into L simultaneously a sensitive artist's heart and an impenetrable layer of street code armor. This very intersection created Big L, a lyrical genius, with the mind of a poet and the instincts of a street warrior. Then the fateful day of his life arrived. Don has 2 tickets to see Run DMC. Your friend backed out, so Don pulled L along. A spur-of-the-moment decision, but one that opened up the future of hip-hop. As the lights of the Beacon Theater illuminated the stage, the bass thundered through his chest like thunder, and Run DMC burst onto the stage like generals charging into battle. L, only 12 years old, stood still as if mesmerized. In that sea of people, the Harlem boy suddenly saw something he had never seen. In the poor neighborhood, his voice could be heard. And from that day on, L was no longer the boy standing in the shadows. He battles every place: school hallways, weekend block parties, laundromats. As long as there's a beat, L will get into it. As long as someone stops, L will silence them. Not long after, L's talent reached the ears of Lord Finesse. Just after hearing one freestyle, Finesse knew he was standing before a Harlem diamond. This kid will bring honor to his family. L joined DITC, appearing with Jay-Z on the Stretch and Bobbito show in a freestyle performance that is still considered classic to this day. Many people believe that L out-rapped Jay that night. Cameron, Mace, Bloodshed. They all saw L as the guide for Harlem, an artist capable of putting their neighborhood on the national hip-hop map. But like all talented black artists of that era, God never gave L the right timing. Rumors that Diddy wanted to sign L before Biggie had been circulating for years, and they reflected one thing: industry insiders saw something special in L. But when Diddy was finally ready to sign, L signed with Columbia, a record label, whose name alone felt like touching the American dream. For a rapper from a poor block, signing with Columbia wasn't just a contract. It's proof that the dream of escaping Harlem is real. But that dream quickly faded. Columbia doesn't understand L. They wanted a pop rapper, but L just wanted to be himself. Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous was born sharp, real, raw to the bone. The underground world worships. Critics nodded. But sales were terrible. 149, Billboard 200 is too low to be pushed, too high to be ignored. And that fall hit so hard that L wanted to quit rap, wanted to go work for Lee as a henchman, because he didn't feel music was a playground for him. But the irony of life lies here sometimes. What seems to bury us is precisely the bridge that leads to good fortune. It was that flop album that made Rockefeller start paying attention to L. Columbia. Didn't know how to handle him. But someone like Dame Dash saw a rough diamond buried under a layer of dust. Rockefeller looked at L with different eyes. They saw a star that was just one push away from exploding. But just as the door of opportunity opened, the seeds of tragedy from childhood, from street code, from ties with his brother, began to knock. And from here, Big L's life entered a new chapter, the darkest one. 2. Short-lived star. In early 1999, Harlem was buzzing with talk of a contract that could change the history of New York rap. Rockefeller wanted to sign Big L. What does that mean? This means that from being a genius, recognized only in the underground scene, he's about to step onto the big stage, where Jay-Z is furiously accelerating, where the best rappers in New York are being catapulted straight into the mainstream. Dame Dash saw potential in LJZ, once freestyled with him, and understood the weight of that name. And the Wolfpack Plan, a group consisting of Jay-Z, Big L, and a team of Harlem MCs, could become the biggest breakthrough since Wu-Tang. All of Harlem believes that this time, finally, their people will see one of their true icons rise from the impoverished 139th Street block. But at that very moment, the moment that should have been the grand opening, Big L was completely alone. Few people know that both of his brothers, Don and Lee, are in prison at the same time. For someone like L, who straddles the line between the rap game and street life, this is like suddenly losing all his defenses. In Harlem, siblings aren't just family, they're a fortress. With someone behind them, all enemies must be wary. There's no one behind him, he's like prey without a herd. Those who understand street code say it straight, this is the most vulnerable time. And right at that moment, Big L received a phone call from a close friend. The kind of small talk he never refused. Come out here and get this for me. According to Don's later account, that friend was forced to call. No one dares to say who forced them. In Harlem in the late 90s, there were names that were never spoken aloud, and there were grudges that no one wanted to be associated with. Most importantly, L has no doubts whatsoever. He walked out of the house as if it were just a normal evening, a trivial matter. He didn't know he was about to enter a night that would shatter the entire hip-hop world. When Big L reached the exact street corner of Danger Zone, a name he himself coined in his music, because this place had everything from violence and jealousy to purges, a man emerged from the shadows. No threat, no argument, there was no scuffle. And in just a few seconds, 9 shots were fired directly into his head and chest. 9 shots, and no one, accidentally, makes that many. No one shoots 9 times if the purpose is robbery. And to be blunt, the shooter didn't take anything from L. Not a watch, not a necklace, not a wallet. Everything is intact. The sole purpose is to get Big L out of the way. The killers were heartbreakingly polite. They shot him right on his block where he was born, grew up, and made the name Lamont Coleman, a small Harlem legend. In the street world, that's no coincidence. That's the message. A type of statement. You'll end up right where you started. But what's even more painful is the timing. They chose the perfect moment just as Big L was about to break out of Harlem, just as he was about to sign a contract that could lift his entire family and the whole block up. It was like a mafia message: no one leaves. To understand Big L's death, it must be placed in a larger context, an era when black rappers were always on the brink of bloodshed. 3 years before he was shot, a talented black rapper was killed each year: Tupac in 1996 in Las Vegas, Biggie in 1997 in LA, and Fat Pat in 1998 in Houston. 3 years in a row, the top 3 victims of the generation. And by 1999, it was Big L's turn. A series of events so bizarre that many people called it a cultural purge. No one takes responsibility. No one is bidding. But every year, a black genius falls. Hip-hop fans, especially those who grew up in the 80s and 90s, feel this more keenly than anyone else. They lost Pac, then Biggie, and then Big L. 3 different styles, 3 different people, but all sharing the same skin color, the same starting point, and the same system of oppression. And when Big L died, they no longer called it an accident. They called it the unwritten law of the era. If you're a truly talented black rapper, you're always on the line between life and death. The death of Big L was not just a personal matter, not just street beef, not just him being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It is a symbol of a time when black people could possess genius within them, but the system, the context, and even the cycles of violence could crush them at any moment. Big L didn't die from a single bullet. He died for an era that robbed hip-hop of its sharpest voices, robbed Harlem of a genius, and robbed fans of a future they still wonder about. If he had lived until 2000, what would have happened? 3. The trap is pre-designed. To outsiders, Harlem is the birthplace of jazz, hip-hop, and vibrant block parties that bring the whole neighborhood together through music. But for those who grew up there, Harlem was like a trap intricately set, long before Big L took his first breath. And when talking about his death, if you only look at personal animosity, you'll miss the invisible wall, the systemic wall, that has imprisoned millions of black people for decades. Big L wasn't just fighting enemies. He was fighting a system designed to make kids like him fail from the start. It all started with the redlining policy. For decades, the government redlined Harlem on maps, designating it a high-risk area, meaning banks refused all loans. People living here don't have access to credit, can't buy homes outside the area, can't open large stores, and can't escape the few blocks where their ancestors were confined. Big L was born into a world where the boundaries were already drawn, and no matter how talented he was, that red line was always right at his feet. For most Americans, borrowing money and expanding a business are normal things. But for the people of Harlem, it was a luxury. They were born in red-lined blocks, and they died in those same blocks. Big L too. That trap didn't just come from the bank. It's still in the police's eyes. At the time, Big L was growing up and starting to rap. The NYPD practiced profiling as an unwritten rule. Black rapper, briar gang member. To put it bluntly, if you're a young black person holding a microphone, you're automatically seen as a criminal. This leads to a terrible consequence. Shootings of rappers, even when there are clear elements of a hit, are not prioritized for investigation. They see it as an everyday occurrence in Harlem, a part of the culture of violence, something so familiar that it doesn't need to be delved into. And when Big L was shot 9 times right on his block, the NYPD's response was the same as every other case. No urgency, no thorough investigation, no recognition of him as a rising artist. In their eyes, he was just another young black man shot in the ghetto. Then came the crack era, the drug epidemic that devastated an entire generation. A series of families broke up. Half a generation of parents were imprisoned. Children aged 7 and 8 witnessed their siblings, neighbors, and close friends being drawn into the crack trade or losing their lives in turf disputes. If you lived in Harlem back then, violence wasn't unusual, but rather the default setting. And Big L, even though he wasn't a dealer or the leader of a gang, was still caught in that current. He saw Lee's brother involved in gangs, saw his friends fall into drugs, and saw shootings happening just a few steps from his house. A child growing up in such an environment cannot possibly remain neutral. No matter how hard you try to stay away, you're still considered part of the game. Harlem at that time had an unspoken rule. If you were famous, you had to be twice as careful. If you make money, you have to be 3 times as careful. And if you start to have the opportunity to leave the area, you become the most visible target. Big L was in that dangerous position, too talented to be ignored, but too connected to Harlem to leave. When the mainstream began to take notice of him, Columbia Records didn't understand his music. They preferred radio-friendly music, while Big L told stories that were painfully real. He's too Harlem for the mainstream market to accept. But the tragedy here is even Harlem won't let him escape. Block culture always has a chilling question for those preparing for success. Who will you miss when you leave here? As Rockefeller began to rise as the biggest dream of his career was within reach, Big L still had to maintain loyalty to his brother Lee, to the NFL, and to the invisible ties that outsiders could hardly imagine. That's the bottleneck that put him in a strange spiral. The mainstream doesn't understand him. Harlem won't let him go. The police didn't protect him. The system had him circled in red lines, even before he became famous. Harlem didn't just make him. It's holding you back. It forced him to be in the exact place where all the hatred converged. And at that fateful moment, when the call came, when he stepped out onto the street, when that figure approached, Big L wasn't just facing an armed enemy. He was facing an entire social structure that had locked the door behind him since the day he was born. To fans, Big L was a genius taken too soon. But when you look deep into the roots, you'll see a much more bitter truth: he can't leave the place that made him. It's not because you're not good enough. It's not because I didn't try. And because Harlem, during that time, was a trap that anyone born there was pulled down into. And Big L was no exception. 4. Imprisoned soul. After leaving Columbia, many people thought Big L would fade into obscurity. But it was precisely that seemingly stagnant period that created the biggest leap in his life. When L stood on his own 2 feet with flamboyant entertainment, he began to have the right to make music the way Harlem taught him, straight up, unbent and independent of any label. And within that very freedom, Ebonics was born. This isn't just a song. It's like a manifesto, a reverse test for the industry. If you want to understand Harlem, understand our language first. You don't need to please the radio. No need for a catchy drop hook. He uses all street slang, the language that the system once tried to distort. What amazed the audience was that with just one song, Decoding Slang, Big L put his name back on the rap map as quickly as a U-turn on Lenox Avenue. The source praised Ebonics as a rare indie hit that no major label could produce. And when the underground press started buzzing, the industry had to take a look back and say, who wrote this? Very quickly, after that, Rockefeller took notice. Dame Dash, who was looking to expand Jay-Z's empire, saw in Big L something Columbia never understood: skills that could threaten an entire chart. If Jay-Z was the Brooklyn Pliers, then Big L was the Harlem Blade, so sharp that even a single freestyle would silence the crowd. For Dame Dash, signing Big L meant Rockefeller would control all of Uptown. And Big L completely understood that he was facing the biggest opportunity of his career. But there was one thing Dame Dash didn't count on, and that no one outside of Harlem could truly understand. Big L never went anywhere alone. When Rockefeller offered a contract, L didn't say, "What do I want?" He said, "Who do you want to go with?" He demanded that the entire Harlem crew, McGruff Seatown and the brothers who stood by him since the block parties, be brought into the big game. For Big L, success meant nothing if it left behind those who had pushed him to perform, who had bet on him in his early battles, and who had stood behind him when Harlem still hadn't recognized him. And it was precisely at the moment L made that request that a subtle pressure became apparent. Rockefeller needed Big L. But they didn't need Harlem. They want the skills, not the risks that come with them. They want a clean artist, not a whole circle of complex relationships where there are names that are opposed to many factions in the city. For them, L is a diamond. But with the entire system of street life that L came from, he was a link in a family and a promise. That's a point many later music listeners don't understand. Big L couldn't be separated from Harlem with just a signature, partly because he didn't want to himself. But the larger part lies in the name Lee, the brother whom the entire 139th and Lenox area considers a pillar. Lee isn't a rapper, but he's the reason L was present at many of the first battles. He is the one who upholds the family's honor in a neighborhood where honor is as important as life itself. When Lee was arrested and had to go to prison, the street code dictated the youngest sibling had to save face for the whole family. That means L has to maintain ties with the NFL, the crew Lee used to work with. From the outside looking in, some people say, Big L got involved in gangs. But anyone who grew up in Harlem knows this isn't a gang. This is family. These are the people who stand by you when you're in trouble. And when they get into trouble, you can't pretend you never knew them. Big L's loyalty wasn't the gangster rap for cool kind. It's something older Harlem residents still often say, go wherever you want, but don't forget who gave you your standing. The problem is that very loyalty keeps him at the most dangerous intersection. Rockefeller pulled him out. Street life drew him in. Outsiders saw Big L on the verge of breaking into the mainstream. But the people of Harlem saw him lying between two worlds that could collide at any moment. And as the name Big L shone brighter, his shadow became more visible. An unknown rapper can walk freely in the area, but a rapper about to sign with Rockefeller isn't. Glory made him stand out more, and standing out in Harlem sometimes meant being more dangerous, especially when he still maintains loyalty to Lee to the NFL and to names with a real history of clashes. Big L found himself in a position no one wants to be in, too talented for his enemies to ignore, too loyal to separate himself from old grudges. In his final years, he probably understood that better than anyone else. But his personality, as sharp as a blade, made it impossible for him to stand in the middle. And it was precisely during that transitional period that Big L became the perfect target, someone who was preparing to leave Harlem, but was still connected enough to be considered from here. Such a person with street politics is the most vulnerable. And that's why the tragedy wasn't just in his death, but in the bitter truth Big L was too famous to be ignored, but too loyal to be spared. 5. Overlapping hate networks. Big L didn't die because of one enemy, but because too many people wanted to see him disappear. That's the phrase people who used to live on 139th Street still whisper when they talk about the night everything fell apart. For them, Big L's death wasn't a surprise shooting, nor was it a spontaneous conflict. It was like a vortex that had been building for years. Every feud, every misunderstanding, every envious glance added another brick to the path that led him to tragedy. And the cruelest thing is he doesn't even know he's on that path. Anyone who lived in Harlem back then knows the story of Lee Big L's brother and the NFL crew. They used to pull off deals that the townsfolk only dared to mention in hushed tones. Among them was a robbery at a major gambling den that even old men who had played cards their whole lives were stunned to hear about. That's not a joke for teenagers. That was a blow to the interests of the people whom all of Harlem avoids. From that day on, the NFL naturally had a much longer list of enemies, and Big L, though not directly involved, was still considered a Coleman, meaning he was on the opposite side. In Harlem, sometimes just having a last name is enough to be stigmatized for life. Then there was the story with Maze, a kind of drama that fans are still arguing about today. Maze told me that one night he was held at gunpoint by a robber. Luckily, the police arrived just in time. But the strange thing wasn't the robbery. The strange thing is what happened next. When the robber was taken to jail, he was beaten so badly that he revealed the name he believed was behind the incident. And that name is Big L. No evidence, no confrontation. No one saw anything. But rumors spread like wildfire. At a time when Mace was at the height of his popularity, any story involving him became a topic of discussion. And as the story spread to the streets of Harlem, it was no longer a rumor. It became a reason for many people to keep an eye on Big L more. The situation was so serious that Fat Joe, one of the most respected rappers at the time, confirmed that L had brought him to Tunnel to sort out a few things. When someone like Fat Joe has to say he had no idea he was caught in the middle of the Harlem tension, you understand how big this drama is. And what's more remarkable, Big L wasn't the type of person to hide behind anyone. If you're appearing in a place as tense as Tunnel, it means you believe you're capable enough to stand your ground. And it was that very confidence that, in the eyes of many others, became a thorn they wanted to remove. But the greatest danger came from Woodley, someone few believed would be involved in Big L's tragedy. Woodley is no stranger. On the contrary, he grew up on the block and was featured on Big L's album cover. The two were once brothers in the truest Harlem sense. But street logic always operates in a different direction. Loyalty is never as strong as suspicion. There are many behind-the-scenes accounts that Big L once called out Woodley in an incident involving Lee. Not because he wanted to harm his friend, but possibly because he was caught in the middle of the family's revenge plot. But for Woodley, L standing there was enough for him to believe that L had chosen sides. And when someone who was once close feels betrayed, the animosity simmers, but is more dangerous than any open street battle. That's what makes Big L's story so unpredictable. He wasn't just hated by enemies in the shadows, he was also misunderstood by the very people who once stood by his side. A friendship with a skewed perspective can lead to a whole network of dangers. And with Woodley, that misunderstanding became a deep chasm between the two. But that's not all. The danger also comes from Big L's own talent. In Harlem, talent can save you, but it can also kill you. Big L is so talented, too sharp, too confident. He wins every battle he enters. He made his contemporaries jealous, earned the respect of industry insiders, and even intimidated those with large egos. Sometimes just one failed look in battle is enough for a rapper to lose respect. And L made many people lose face like that. He rose quickly, but there was no organization strong enough to provide cover behind him. You win too much, and you have too few allies. In a place like Harlem, that's the perfect recipe for trouble. And then, all of this piled up Lee's past, the drama with Mace, the misunderstanding with Woodley, the jealousy of talent rumors from prisoners, exaggerated stories from the Tunnel. There's no single reason why he was killed. There's not a single person behind this. Not a single arrow hit him in the heart. It was a whole volley of arrows flying simultaneously coming from directions he didn't have time to see. Big L's death was the product of years of accumulation street politics, misunderstandings, reputation, loyalty, and even the silence of those who knew the truth, but didn't want to speak. And looking back, people understand that it wasn't a single bullet that took Big L's life, but rather, it was all the bullets fired from different stories, different people, different reasons. Yet they all met at exactly one point, 139th Street, on a winter night in 1999. Big L didn't die because of an enemy. He died because of a whole network of people who wanted him to disappear. A genius torn apart by too many hands. And that's the real tragedy. 6. Half-hearted investigation. If Big L were a white artist, perhaps the night he was shot 9 times in Harlem would have created a media earthquake. Police cordoned off the neighborhood, the press camped out in front of the station, and the entire United States mourned the loss of a stolen talent. But Big L was a black rapper from Harlem, and that determined how his death would be treated quickly, coldly, and neatly, like an administrative procedure. The police caught Gerard Woodley simply because he was L's childhood friend, and the name sounded reasonable to put in the report. But then they released him just as quickly. No evidence. No one followed who called L out of the house that day. They didn't check the cameras around the block, even though Harlem already had the city's surveillance system at that time. Not asking again those present in the row of houses that were as tightly packed as a beehive. The entire investigation proceeded as if they were handling a minor scuffle, not the death of a rapper who was about to sign with Rockefeller and change an entire neighborhood's fortunes. The way they lumped everything into the conclusion of gang killing truly shocked the people of Harlem. First, there is no evidence the shooting was gang-related. No message, no territorial dispute, no sign of two-way gunfire. This is clearly an execution. But the NYPD overlooked that possibility, ignoring the connection between Big L and Rockefeller, ignoring the information that he was preparing to sign a major contract, and ignoring the question of why the killer chose the exact moment when L's two brothers were both locked up in prison when he had no one to protect him. An old police officer once said in a vague interview that, "It's all just a bunch of Harlem kids killing each other." Just that one sentence shows that prejudice has replaced the police in the entire investigation process. The press isn't any better either. A few New York newspapers ran a few lines like a brief headline, "Rapper shot in Harlem." No one emphasizes that Big L once shared a stage with Biggie. No one mentions that this is an MC respected by both Jay-Z and Eminem. No one said he was about to stand alongside Rockefeller, which at the time for a black person was a truly golden dream. No reporters went to investigate behind the scenes. Who called you out of the house? Why shoot the exact block where he grew up? Why 9 shots? Why did the killer aim straight for the head with the very first shot? Why did some people claim that Big L was set up? No questions were explored in depth. The media simply categorized Big L's death as one of the anonymous shootings happening every week in Harlem, as if he were just another statistic in the violence data. At that moment, fans felt like they had been slapped in the face, because anyone who grew up with Big L's music knows this isn't just about a gambling kid who got caught up in a bad deal. This is the death of a genius about to come to light. But in the eyes of the system, he was just a black rapper from Danger Zone, a name not clean enough to be a worthy victim. The reason why the entire United States stood up when a white artist was killed is completely absent here. No flowers, no remembrance, no deep discussion about injustice. Seinfeld once said a haunting line, "In America, the death of a black person doesn't create a ripple effect. It just creates silence." And yes, silence is all Big L got. The bitter truth is that even after Woodley was killed in 2016, 17 years after Big L's death, the NYPD still didn't review the case files. There's no question why the person who was once the sole suspect was killed in the same execution-style manner as L. Not questioning Woodley's overlapping feud with Lee L's brother. Not asking again those who previously stated they saw someone standing around the block that day. A case with so many irregularities was handled by the system, as if it were a story they wanted to forget as quickly as possible. For audiences who grew up with 90s hip-hop, what hurt them most wasn't just the loss of Big L, but the way he was treated after his death, as if his talent didn't matter, as if his promising career never existed. A person once considered the next big thing after Biggie and Pac was instead typecast as a Harlem youth who died because of gangs. When you hear older rappers recount memories of LJZ, Fat Joe, Lord Finesse, they all generally say the same thing. If L were alive, things would be different. And the biggest tragedy here is that the system never gave him the chance to write his next chapter. In hip-hop, death is often talked about as part of street life, but Big L's death wasn't street life. It's the most stark image of a discriminatory society, where black talent is only celebrated while alive and disregarded when it falls. The final picture left behind was a silent Harlem block, a genius lying on the street he once called the Danger Zone, and a police record so thin that a single gust of wind could blow it away. That's what truly chills fans. The way Big L was treated after his death was even more terrifying than the way he was shot.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.